My name is Isabella Moretti. I am 56 years old, once the chief curator of an art museum in Florence. I thought I had trained my eyes to recognize forgeries, to catch the faintest crack on a marble statue or the thinnest brushstroke of deceit. But nothing in all my years of studying masterpieces prepared me for the deception I saw on the small glowing screen of my phone. It began with a voicemail. The voice was sharp, almost mocking. "Watch this, and you'll see who your son really is." I remember how my hand trembled as I tapped the screen. The phone suddenly weighed as much as one of the bronze busts I had spent a lifetime cataloging. The video opened with the sound of heels clicking against marble. Then I saw him. Luca, my only son, my pride, my reason for every sacrifice, emerged from the doorway of a luxury apartment. He wasn't alone. A woman, older than me, clutched his arm. Her smile looked satisfied, triumphant, like a collector who had just secured a rare prize. In his hand, Luca held a thick envelope. Even on the grainy footage, the outline of money was unmistakable. And then the words came, crueler than any image. "The angel she worships? Just another gold digger." My breath caught. For a moment, I thought my heart had simply stopped. My back pressed hard into the wooden chair of my office, the same chair where I had spent years signing exhibition papers, reviewing acquisitions, dreaming of Luca's future. The edges of the seat bit into my skin, but I couldn't move. My whole body was stone. The museum walls around me blurred. The bust of Apollo in the corner seemed to tilt, watching me with cold indifference. The silence of the office, once comforting, turned suffocating. I could hear only the faint buzz of the phone and the ragged rhythm of my breathing. I wanted to cry out, to deny what my eyes had seen, but my voice deserted me. All I managed was a whisper, half plea, half curse. "No, not you, Luca, not you." But the video kept replaying, merciless. Each time, his steps out of that apartment looked heavier, more deliberate, as if he was walking out of my life. Each time, the envelope seemed thicker, his grip on it tighter. I should have stopped watching, but I couldn't. My eyes burned, yet I pressed replay again and again, punishing myself with the same 30 seconds. My son's smile, so familiar, so once innocent, now carried a shadow I had never noticed. Or perhaps I had refused to notice. The chair creaked under me, and for a strange second I thought of the statues I'd spent years restoring. Marble cracked when pressure grew too heavy. Was I cracking now, right here, alone with my phone? In that instant, I felt the ground shift under me. The trust I had built across decades through endless nights of work, through sacrifices I never spoke of, crumbled in silence. That was the moment my world collapsed. Heavier than any sculpture I had ever carried, heavier than any stone in Florence. And I knew nothing would ever look the same again. The leather chair in my office groaned as I leaned back, the same tired sound it had made for more than 2 decades. Its arms were cracked. The color faded from black to a weary brown. That chair had been with me longer than most people in my life, longer even than Luca's adulthood. Every crease in the leather seemed to hold a memory, and as I sat in it now, numb from the video I had just watched, I felt the past rise up and swallow me. I had raised Luca alone after the accident that stole his father from us. He was only 7, still clinging to my skirts at night, when I stood in front of the hospital morgue and realized I would be mother and father both. I remember clutching his small hand, cold and damp with fear, as I promised him, "You will not go without, Luca, not as long as I'm alive." I kept that promise, at a cost I never dared to calculate until much later. The museum became my second home, sometimes my only home. I translated dusty catalogs by candlelight, my eyes raw from squinting over Latin inscriptions. I guided wealthy visitors through the galleries, my voice steady and elegant even as my feet blistered inside cheap heels. Every extra shift, every lecture delivered to restless tourists, it all funneled toward Luca's education. Numbers became milestones of my sacrifice. 18,000 euros each year for his international school tuition, 3,000 more for piano lessons because his fingers danced over the keys so gracefully that I convinced myself he was born to be a musician. Another 1,500 for art classes, paint splattered across his jeans while I smiled at every ruined pair. Add in uniforms, field trips, books with glossy covers. It was endless. My colleagues at the museum bought new cars. I kept patching up the old Fiat, its engine coughing in protest every winter. But Luca's tuition bill was always paid, on time, without fail. That leather chair bore silent witness to all of it. I would sit there until midnight, hunched over receipts, balancing what little remained after tuition was covered. Sometimes I fell asleep in it, pen slipping from my hand, only to wake at dawn with stiff joints and the taste of ink on my tongue. I joked that the chair had molded itself to my spine. In truth, I had molded myself to a life of endurance. And then came the first call. I remember it as clearly as if it were playing now through my phone. The museum was quiet, the lights dimmed, the scent of polish heavy in the air. My phone buzzed on the arm of the leather chair, and Luca's voice came through, shaky, urgent. "Mama, just this once. I promise I'll pay you back." I closed my eyes that night, pressing the phone against my cheek as if I could comfort him through the wire. My answer was automatic, unthinking. "I trust you, Luca." How many times did I repeat those words over the years? Enough that they lost their way, became ritual. I trusted him because what else was there to do when your only son asks? Sometimes, in the quietest hours, I wondered if I was too soft. I remembered the warnings from colleagues. "Don't spoil him, Isabella. A boy needs limits." I laughed it off, insisting Luca was different. My Luca was kind, talented, grateful. I clung to that belief, even when he came home later and later, even when he began to dodge questions about where he was going, who he was with. The chair kept groaning under me, but I ignored it, just as I ignored the faint unease in my chest whenever he called, just as I ignored the way he avoided eye contact when I asked about money. There were moments of joy, too, warm enough to burn away doubt. I can still see him at 12 years old, performing Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on a stage that seemed far too large for his small frame. His school uniform sagged at the shoulders, but his music soared. I clutched the program in my hands so tightly it tore at the edges. Afterward, he ran into my arms, sweat on his forehead, whispering, "Did I do well, Mama?" And I, with tears stinging my eyes, answered, "You were magnificent." Those nights made every invoice worth it. Or so I told myself. But underneath the pride, guilt simmered. Every euro spent on Luca was a euro I did not spend on myself. I declined invitations to dinners, let birthdays pass uncelebrated, wore the same 3 dresses on rotation. I justified it all by saying, "One day, he will repay me in love." Perhaps I even believed that love could balance ledgers. And yet, there were cracks, hairline fractures invisible to anyone but me. The first time he failed to return money he had promised to repay by the end of the month. The first time I noticed him pocketing more from my purse than I had handed him. Small things, ignorable things, until they weren't. The leather chair groaned again under my weight as I shifted, dragging myself back into the present. My fingers brushed the worn armrest, tracing grooves that had formed beneath my nails during countless nights of worry. This chair had been the anchor of my sacrifices, the throne of a mother's blind devotion. And now, as I sat in it once more, the video still glowing on my phone, I realized something terrifying. All along, I had built my life like a gilded frame, polished, sturdy, heavy with effort, only to hang a single image inside it. Luca's dreams, Luca's future, Luca's smile. I had constructed my entire existence as a frame, only to suspend my son's ambitions in the center like a fragile painting. And if that painting was false, if it was nothing more than a forgery, than what was left of me. I was 23 when I first walked into the museum as an employee. My belly was round with Luca, though I tried to hide it beneath a black dress that had already grown too tight. My colleagues whispered behind my back, "A single mother at her age?" But I straightened my shoulders and queued up for the evening shift as if my dignity were another artifact to be protected behind glass. The marble floors were unforgiving. The air smelled faintly of varnish and dust. I remember leaning against a column during closing hours, the weight of my child pressing on my ribs, my legs trembling after 8 hours of standing. My supervisor passed me, frowned at the way I cradled my stomach, and muttered, "Work or don't, Isabella. The statues don't pity you." I smiled through clenched teeth. If I broke, who would care for the life inside me? Those nights, after guiding tourists through the echoing galleries, I would slip into the empty hall where Michelangelo's David stood. I would look up at that marble giant, flawless and unyielding, and whisper to my unborn son, "You will be stronger than me. I'll make sure of it." Years later, when Luca was 5, he ran to me one evening holding a crumpled sheet of paper. Crayon marks smeared his fingers, and his eyes glowed with triumph. "Mama, look, I drew us." On the page was a child's attempt at grandeur. A stick figure woman with wild hair, standing beside a tall statue labeled David in wobbly letters. Beside her, a smaller figure with a wide smile. Above the two, he had scrawled in bright red, "Mama e Luca." My throat tightened. It was messy, uneven, but to me, it was more precious than any Renaissance painting. I framed that drawing and hung it in our living room, right above the secondhand sofa. For 20 years, it stayed there, paper yellowing, colors fading, but the meaning eternal. Every morning, I saw it before leaving for work, and it reminded me why exhaustion never won. When I returned home late at night, sometimes too tired to cook, Luca would tug my sleeve and point to the drawing. "That's us, right, Mama? Always together." And I would answer, even as tears threatened, "Always, my love, always." It became my talisman. Whenever bills piled too high or colleagues mocked my choices, I only had to glance at that childish sketch to remember why I endured. It was proof that Luca saw me not just as a provider, but as his companion, his safe place. I sacrificed gladly. New shoes for him meant worn soles for me. Private piano lessons for him meant secondhand coats for myself. The museum paid me just enough to survive, but somehow I stretched every euro to fit his dreams. I told myself the cracks in my life didn't matter because his canvas would be whole. And for a long time, I believed that was enough. I can still recall one winter evening when Florence was wrapped in fog. Lucas sat at the upright piano we could barely afford, his small fingers stumbling through Beethoven. He turned to me afterward, cheeks flushed, asking breathlessly, "Did I play it right?" I cupped his face and whispered, "Perfectly, Luca, perfectly." In truth, the notes were clumsy, halting, but to me they were symphonies. His music filled the silence I carried since his father's death. His laughter stitched together the loneliness that threatened to unravel me. The years blurred, school reports, scraped knees, birthday candles lit on cakes I could hardly afford. Through it all, the drawing of Mama e Luca hung above us, paper growing brittle, but our bond seeming unbreakable. And yet, sitting now in the present, staring at that same piece of paper, I noticed details I once ignored. The figure of the mother is drawn small, almost fragile, while the child stands taller, closer to the statue of David. Perhaps it was only a child's mistake, but I cannot help but wonder, was it a prophecy? Had I been raising him to tower over me until one day he would step beyond my shadow entirely? I used to believe that all I needed was his eyes meeting mine, filled with trust, to erase every sacrifice. That one look from him could make fatigue vanish, debts dissolve, loneliness retreat. But now, as the drawing trembles slightly under the weight of the years, I feel a different truth creeping in. I once believed that a single glance from my son could dissolve all my hardships. I once thought his eyes alone were enough, and perhaps that was my greatest mistake. It was late one evening when I noticed it first. The apartment was unusually quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't comfort but unsettles. Luca sat at the dining table, his phone in his hand. The glow of the screen lit up his face, but the moment I stepped into the room, he pressed the button and the light vanished. The sound of the leather chair greeted me as I lowered myself into it, the same groan I had heard 1,000 times during nights of paperwork at the museum. I leaned forward, searching his eyes. "Luca," I asked softly, "is there something you're not telling me?" He looked up, startled, then forced a smile. It was the kind of smile a child wears when hiding chocolate behind his back, but Luca was no child anymore. "Mama, you worry too much. It's just work." His voice was calm, but the pause before he spoke was too long. I noticed the way his fingers drummed against the edge of the table, quick and nervous. For a moment, I saw the little boy who once ran to me with crayon-stained hands, eager to show his drawings. But now his hand shielded something, rather than offering it. I should have pressed further. I should have insisted. Instead, I looked down at the scratches on the armrest of my chair and told myself I was imagining things. After all, I had always been good at seeing patterns where none existed. Wasn't that what curators did? But this was not marble or canvas. This was my son. The air between us felt heavy, as if the apartment itself held its breath. I tried to ease it. "You know you can tell me anything, don't you?" My words were gentle, but they carried a plea I hadn't intended to reveal. He chuckled. "Too light, too brittle. Of course, Mama, you're imagining things. Really." And with that, he rose, kissed my cheek quickly, and disappeared into his room. I stayed behind, the leather chair groaning under me as if echoing my unease. I sat there for a long time, staring at the closed door, telling myself stories to calm my heart. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe it was a girlfriend he wasn't ready to introduce. Maybe it was simply private, as all young men deserve their privacy. But somewhere deep inside, beneath layers of denial, a voice whispered, "This is different. This is not nothing." Still, I smothered the thought. I told myself I had no right to pry, that trust was more important than suspicion. I had spent my career studying the tiniest cracks on ancient statues, reading the faintest discoloration on frescoes, unearthing secrets hidden in pigments centuries old. Yet when it came to Luca, I closed my eyes. Because sometimes love makes you blind, not by accident, but by choice. I had learned to read every line in an ancient masterpiece, but I dared not decipher the lines of worry etched across my own son's face. The gala evening at the museum should have been a celebration, a night where art and generosity mingled under chandeliers. I had helped plan every detail, the placement of the floral arrangements, the careful selection of Baroque pieces displayed in the central hall, the order of speeches. For me, the museum was sacred ground. Every event there felt like proof that beauty could endure in a world of chaos. That night, I wore a simple black gown I had altered myself, the hem stitched late at night while the city slept. I had not planned to talk about Luca. This was my professional realm where I was Isabella the curator, not Isabella the mother. But children, like shadows, follow you even into places where you least expect them. I was pouring myself a glass of Chianti when a colleague, a woman I had known for years, leaned close. Her perfume was sharp, her voice softer still, as if she feared her words might echo off the marble walls. "Isabella," she whispered, "do you know what they're saying about Luca?" My chest tightened before she even continued. "They say he's involved with a widow, a wealthy one, that he's taking advantage." The rim of my glass pressed against my lip, bitter wine trembling on the edge. I forced a smile, one I hoped looked casual, but my pulse was hammering. "People gossip, you know how it is." My words felt thin, paper-like, as if the slightest pressure would tear them apart. But the rumors did not stop with whispers. Later that evening, as donors mingled and laughter echoed off the vaulted ceilings, one of the guests, a man with a cigar clenched arrogantly between his fingers, spoke loud enough for several to hear. "So, the young Moretti boy," he drawled, smirking. "Seems he has a knack for, let's call it, art transactions." A ripple of laughter followed, cruel and knowing. My fingers stiffened around the stem of the glass. The room tilted, the chandeliers swaying like pendulums above me. I tried to breathe, but the air was suddenly heavy, perfumed with disdain. My hand slipped. The glass shattered at my feet, red wine bleeding across the marble like spilled blood. The sound froze the room for a heartbeat. Conversations faltered. Eyes turned, but I heard only the cruel echo of the man's words, reverberating louder than the fall of glass. I bent down quickly, murmuring apologies, my knees weak against the polished floor. As I gathered the shards with trembling fingers, I saw my reflection splintered in the fragments, eyes wide, face pale, lips pressed tight to hold back a sob. In that fractured reflection, I remembered Luca at 5 years old, running toward me with the drawing he had made, Mama e Luca, beside the statue of David. For years, that picture had been my anchor, proof of innocence and love. But in that moment, the colors blurred in my memory, the smile on the child's face no longer steady but wavering, uncertain. The paper had grown yellow with age, yet I had always seen it as bright. Now, for the first time, the drawing seemed faded, fragile, as though time had stolen not only its vibrancy, but its truth. I rose to my feet, murmuring something about clumsiness, but inside I was collapsing. Every whisper around me clung to my skin like smoke, impossible to brush away. I felt exposed, stripped bare in the very building where I had spent my life curating dignity and permanence. I wanted to run, to escape the room with its glittering chandeliers and polished guests, but my legs carried me automatically through the crowd. Smiles brushed against me, conversations resumed, but I no longer belonged to the moment. I was somewhere else entirely, caught between the memory of a little boy who once whispered, "Always together, Mama," and the image of a man stepping out of an apartment with an envelope in his hand. When the speeches began, I clapped when expected, nodded when people turned to me, but none of it reached me. My ears were ringing with the sound of broken glass. My eyes kept drifting toward the exit, as if the night might release me if I just willed it hard enough. I had endured whispers before about being a single mother, about sacrificing too much for my child, but this was different. This was not judgment on me. This was judgment on Luca. And though I wanted to deny it, to dismiss it as slander, the doubt had already rooted itself deep inside me. The gala ended with applause and polite farewells. But as I walked out into the cool Florence night, the echo followed me. The sound of glass breaking on marble was lighter than the sound of my heart cracking inside my chest. And that night, for the first time, I feared the rumors might be true. It was a small, ordinary moment that carried the weight of catastrophe. Morning light filtered through the shutters, casting pale stripes across the leather chair where I had collapsed the night before. The coffee on the table had gone cold, untouched. My phone still lay beside it, screen dark, waiting. I should have turned it off. I should have walked away. But instead, with trembling fingers, I pressed play again. The same apartment door. The same older woman stepping out beside him. The same envelope. Only this time, I forced myself to watch until the very end. Luca leaned in, his arms slipping around her waist. He kissed her cheek, smiled, and whispered something I could not hear. Then they disappeared together into the night. My stomach clenched. My breath stopped halfway in my throat. It felt as if the room itself had shrunk, pressing me against the chair until I could no longer move. Was this my son? Was this the boy I carried through sleepless nights, the man I sacrificed my life for? Or had I been raising a stranger all along? The questions came in blows, one after another. Had I built 30 years of trust on nothing but sand? Was every promise he made only a line in a cruel play? How could I have been so blind? My hands trembled as I reached for the financial folder tucked beneath the desk. Inside were papers I had reviewed 1,000 times: bank transfers, automatic payments, monthly allowances. Numbers, neat and tidy, marching in rows like obedient soldiers. Soldiers I had sent into battle for him every month without hesitation. But now, staring at those numbers, they looked like chains. Chains I had forged myself, link by link, with every yes I uttered when I should have said no. I set the papers on the desk, smoothed them with the flat of my palm. My heart pounded. The air grew thick, almost sticky, as though the apartment itself resisted what I was about to do. For 30 years, my signature had preserved masterpieces, safeguarded treasures for future generations. Each time I signed, it was for the museum, for history, for Luca's education. My name had been a seal of protection. But now I picked up the pen for something different. I thought of what would happen if I did not change. If I continued, month after month, year after year, funding not his future, but his deception, I would not only lose my savings, my dignity, my peace, I would lose myself. And yet, the other side of the scale was unbearable too. Cutting him off, risking his anger, risking the final shattering of what little bond we still shared. The thought made my chest ache. To choose myself meant perhaps to lose him forever. The pen felt heavy between my fingers, slick with sweat. My breathing turned shallow. My whole body shook, as if rejecting the act. Still, I lowered the tip to the page. The scratch of ink across paper was louder than the breaking of glass at the gala, louder than the cruel whispers of my colleagues, louder even than the silence that followed Luca's lies. With each stroke of my signature, something inside me steadied. My hand, once trembling, grew firm. The final curve of the letter was sharp, decisive. I set the pen down, exhaled, and for the first time in years, the leather chair beneath me did not feel like a prison. It felt like a throne. I whispered aloud, my voice hoarse but clear. Enough. No more. And in that moment, I was no longer the woman who waited for explanations, who justified, who endured. I was someone else, someone who could stand, who could resist, who could say no, even to the person she loved most. For the first time in 30 years, I signed my name not to preserve artifacts, but to preserve myself. The silence came first. Not the peaceful kind, but the suffocating kind that presses against the walls and seeps under doors. Days passed without a single call from Luca. No cheerful, "Mama, how are you?" No excuses about late nights at work. Only silence. I tried to fill the void with routine. I brewed coffee in the mornings, walked to the market, answered emails from the museum. But each evening, when I lowered myself into the leather chair, the silence returned. Shh. The chair groaned as always, its weary protest echoing through the room. It was a sound I once found comforting, a reminder of endurance. Now it felt like mockery, like the house itself was sighing at my foolish hope. When messages finally came, they were stripped of warmth. Busy. Send later. Why no transfer? Short lines, blunt as stones. No greetings, no affection. I stared at them, my thumbs hovering above the keyboard, searching for words. I typed, "Are you all right?" Then deleted it. I typed, "I love you," then deleted that too. In the end, I sent nothing. One evening, the air felt heavier than usual, as if the silence itself had weight. My phone buzzed on the table. I picked it up, heart racing, desperate for something, anything. The message glowed. "You'll regret this, Mama. You'll see." I read it 3 times, each repetition carving deeper into me. The boy who once pressed crayon drawings into my hands was gone. In his place was a man who spoke to me like a creditor, like an enemy. Nights stretched longer. I lay awake listening to the old apartment creak, to the distant hum of traffic across the Arno. Every sound felt amplified, as though the house itself held its breath. waiting. Sometimes I imagined I heard Luca's footsteps outside the door, quick and impatient. But when I opened my eyes, the hallway was empty. At the museum, colleagues asked after him politely, unaware of the tension that filled my home. I smiled, gave vague answers. He's busy. He's working. Lies spoken smoothly because the truth would have shattered me if I admitted it aloud. The tension was not only in his absence, but in every trace he left behind. His jacket still hung by the door, smelling faintly of cologne. His half-read book lay abandoned on the shelf. Each object became an accusation. You raised me. You gave me everything. Why did you stop now? One afternoon, I walked past the framed drawing, Mama e Luca beside the statue of David. For years, it had been my shield. That day, I could not look at it. I turned the frame face down on the table, unable to bear its gaze. The waiting gnawed at me. I knew confrontation was coming. The message had promised as much. Yet nothing arrived. No knock at the door, no sudden appearance. Only silence that grew thicker, like clouds gathering before a storm. Every evening I sat in the leather chair, listening to it creak beneath me, wondering if this was what mothers of traitors felt centuries ago. Knowing the child they loved was preparing a betrayal, powerless to stop it. And then came the smallest event, but it pierced me more than shouting ever could. A neighbor, an elderly man who had lived in the building for decades, stopped me on the stairwell. He hesitated, cleared his throat, then asked carefully, "Is everything all right with Luca? I saw him last week. He didn't look himself." I forced a smile, the mask I wore for the world. "He's fine, thank you." But inside, my heart crumbled. If even strangers saw what I had refused to see, then the storm was closer than I dared admit. That night, I sat alone in the chair again, the phone face up on the table, waiting for the inevitable. The silence between us had once been filled with understanding, with the comfort of knowing words weren't needed. But now, it had twisted into something else entirely. The silence between us was no longer a bridge. It had become a chasm. The apartment was quiet when I heard the knock. Not the hesitant tap of a visitor, but the sharp, deliberate rap of someone announcing ownership. My chest tightened. For a moment, I thought of pretending not to hear, but the knock came again, louder this time. I rose from the leather chair, its groans slicing through the silence, and opened the door. Luca stood there, my son. But beside him was a young man in a crisp suit, a leather briefcase dangling from his hand. The man's smile was polished, professional, utterly detached. "Mama," Luca said, his voice smooth, rehearsed. "We need to talk." He stepped past me without waiting for permission, the lawyer trailing behind. The smell of expensive cologne and fresh ink filled the apartment, suffocating the air that once smelled only of coffee and old books. We gathered around the dining table. The lawyer placed a folder down, opened it with careful precision, and slid a sheet of paper toward me. Luca's voice was almost casual. "It's just a formality, Mama. A power of attorney. You sign, and everything will be easier for both of us." I looked at the paper, then at him. My son's eyes did not meet mine. They lingered on the document as though it were more important than the woman who had given him life. "No, Luca," my voice was calm, steady. "I will not sell my soul for counterfeit affection." He flinched slightly, then forced a smile. "You're being dramatic. This is about practicality. You've always trusted me, haven't you?" The lawyer leaned forward, pen in hand. "Sign here, Mrs. Moretti. It will protect your interests." "If you refuse," his eyes flicked up, cold and sharp. "We'll have to find another way." I met his stare. "Don't turn me into a pawn in your game." The air between us thickened. The lawyer adjusted his tie, but Luca shifted in his seat, restless. He leaned closer, lowering his voice as if softening the blow. "Mama, I've done so much for you. I've been by your side all these years. Don't you think it's time you trust me with this small thing?" I wanted to laugh bitter, hollow laughter, but my throat was tight. Instead, I whispered, I trusted you with everything, and this is what you bring me. He slammed his hand on the table, the sound echoing through the room. Why do you make everything so difficult? You're clinging to scraps of control. And for what? For pride? For dignity, I replied, voice firmer now. The lawyer interrupted, tapping the paper with his pen. We can settle this quietly, or we can escalate it. That's your choice. My hands curled against the wooden arms of the chair. I felt the cracked leather beneath my fingers, each line like a scar. My breath was unsteady, but my resolve hardened. I will not sign, I said. Luca's eyes darkened. You think you're strong, Mama, but you'll regret this. When things fall apart, don't come to me. I stood slowly. The chair groaned beneath me, one last sigh as I rose. My knees trembled, but my spine straightened. For 30 years, I had bent. Tonight, I refused. I looked from my son to the lawyer, my voice ringing clear in the stagnant air. You came here thinking I would bow, that I would hand over my life with a stroke of a pen. But I am not your victim. Not anymore. Silence hung between us, heavy and undeniable. Luca looked away first, his jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides. The lawyer closed his folder with a snap, frustration flashing across his face. Neither spoke as they left, the door shutting with a dull thud. I stood in the quiet that followed, heart hammering, body trembling. The leather chair waited behind me, but I did not sit. Not this time. I rose from the old leather chair, and with it, I rose from the role of victim. The first blow did not arrive as shouting or slammed doors. It arrived folded in thirds inside a white envelope stamped with a crimson seal. I found it waiting on my doormat at 7:12 a.m., the hour I usually left for the market. The paper was heavy, expensive, the kind of paper that announces itself before anyone reads the words. When I slid it open with the butter knife from the kitchen, my hands left a smear of coffee on the margin. It was a formal notice, written in the dry language that strips flesh from bone. A petition questioning my financial competency and suggesting temporary control of my assets for the protection of the estate and the preservation of familial welfare. My eyes tripped over phrases like pattern of imprudent transfers and cognitive decline observed by close relatives. Somewhere below, the name Luca Moretti appeared as concerned party. I leaned against the wall, the plaster cool on my shoulder, and read it again, slower. The petition said I'd missed loan payments, that I had repeatedly confused monthly obligations. It referenced several episodes of forgetfulness dates listed like pins on a map: March 18, 2024, July 3, 2024, January 11, 2025. The first two dates I could connect to minor things. I'd misplaced my museum pass one evening. I'd returned late from a donor visit. But the third January 11 was Luca's birthday. That day, I had baked a pear tart, his favorite, and waited until the candles burned low. I remember every second of it. Forgetfulness? No. Loneliness, perhaps, but not forgetfulness. A second envelope had been tucked behind the first. This one bore the neat, clipped handwriting of a different enemy, the bank. Temporary freeze pending review of power of attorney filings. They needed time to verify. I did not need a translator to understand the subtext. Someone had already made a move. I called the number on the notice. A polite woman recited a schedule in a voice trained to sound empathetic. There would be a preliminary hearing. There would be time to respond. There would be forms. There would be costs. Of course there would. When I hung up, the apartment felt smaller, as if the walls had wandered inward during the call. In the living room, the drawing, Mama y Luca was still face down where I had left it days before. I couldn't bring myself to stand it up. I put on a coat and walked. The air over the Arno was damp and metallic, the light thin as paper. I thought of who to call. Who would understand both the law and the language of betrayal? The answer came not from my heart, but from my memory of battles won at the museum. Elena Rossi. Elena had been the museum's legal counsel a decade earlier, the same woman who had wrestled a stolen panel of a polyptych back from a collector in Zurich. She had a face carved by patience and a voice that sharpened when truth was threatened. I dialed. Isabella, she answered on the second ring. No greeting, no small talk. She had always been like that. What have they sent you? I told her, the petition, the freeze, the dates. I heard her breath flatten on the line, a metronome measuring my fear. Bring everything, she said. Today, noon, my office, Via de Neri, 42. And, Isabella, eat something first. You'll think more clearly. I didn't eat, but I went. Elena's office smelled of paper and ironed linen. She listened without interrupting, her pen steady over a legal pad. When I finished, she slid the petition back to me and tapped the dates with the end of her pen. They've choreographed it, she said. The dates create a portrait. It doesn't have to be true. It has to be plausible. Her mouth drew into a thinner line. We'll write a counterportrait. She asked for documents. This was a language I understood. I could mount an exhibition of my life, bank statements, museum contracts, dated emails to donors, receipt books, the entry log from the guard's desk, photocopies of my journals. She made a list with boxes to tick, and I felt something old return to me. Purpose, the only anesthetic that had ever worked. I left her office with a folder of instructions and a meeting set for Thursday 10:00 a.m. I had 3 days to make myself legible to the law. The next blow came not on paper, but in whispers that traveled faster than letters. By afternoon, 3 colleagues had written to ask, gently, if everything was all right at home. One forwarded a link to a message board I'd never visited. The post was unsigned. Curator squanders museum stipend on personal expenses. Concerned son seeks help. It took me 3 rereads to understand the lie. The museum stipend, a modest annual research grant, appeared beside screenshots of my bank transfers to Luca, as if the two were connected. I pressed my palms to my eyes until colors bloomed. A century with art had taught me how easily context can be falsified. Place a sketch beside another, invent a lineage, and even experts can be fooled. But this was not an exhibition, it was my name. I sent the link to Elena. Her reply came quickly. Do not engage there. Screenshot everything. We'll address it through the filing. That night, I went hunting through my apartment like an archivist. I opened drawers I hadn't touched in years, unearthed receipts from the conservator's shop dated 12/04/2023. Notes I had scribbled during a donor tour on May 9, 2024, winter gas bills paid in cash when the bank system had glitched. I found a yellowed envelope containing photocopies of Luca's school fees with my annotations in the margins. Paid 18,000 installments complete 06/20. Evidence of a mother's diligence. Evidence that could be contorted perhaps, but still evidence. At midnight, I climbed on a stool to pull a battered shoebox from the top of the wardrobe. Inside lay the register of transfers I had kept before internet banking, each line a tiny prayer. 300 piano lessons, 45 books, WM, 1,200 tuition balance. I touched my finger to the word tuition and forced myself not to cry. In the days that followed, the opposing side performed their ballet of distortion. A neighbor from 2 floors down, a woman I barely knew, suddenly remembered that I had once forgotten to lock the mailboxes. A barista on the corner declared I had left without paying one morning, though the receipt timestamp sat folded in my wallet 08/37/220, cappuccino, cornetto. Someone claimed I had been seen arguing with the ATM on September 2, 2024, as if my mutter at a jammed card reader proved mental decline. Elena circled each accusation on her pad and requested the corresponding camera footage. We will not argue feelings, she said. We will show time. Her assistant, a quiet young woman named Marina, went to the cafe with me and asked, almost shyly, for the archived receipts. She returned with a stapled printout and a small conspiratorial smile. They keep everything, she whispered, as if we had stolen fire from a god. Not all witnesses stood against me. That was the mercy of it. The night guard at the museum, Signor Bianchi, stopped me by the staff entrance one evening. He had the soft walk of a man who knows how to move around sleeping paintings. Daughteressa, he said, he never stopped using the old honorific, I heard things. His eyes flicked away, embarrassed on behalf of gossip. If you need the entry logs, we can locate them. Your signature, your times. You always sign. He lifted a hand, ink-stained. You always sign. A neighbor across the hall, Signora Mancini, knocked on my door with a tinfoil parcel of baked eggplant and an opinion. I don't care what anyone says, she told me before I could thank her. I've watched you carry groceries alone for 15 years. People who squander do not iron pillowcases on Thursdays. And you, she wagged a floury finger, you iron. I laughed, a sound that startled us both. If anyone asks, she added, I am not blind. I will write it down. Even the archivist in the museum basement, little Fabrizio, contributed. He spoke as if his words might disturb shelves. If your counsel needs proof of your cataloging hours, I can export the database logs, he murmured. There is a column for who updated what and when. He lifted his palms. The system remembers, even when people forget. Between each surge of threat, life tried to persist. I still bought clementines from the same vendor whose fingers smelled of orange oil. I still tied my scarf at the mirror and startled at the woman looking back, older than yesterday somehow. Some afternoons, I crossed the river and sat on a bench, watching a child on a bright red scooter turn circles while his mother pretended not to be afraid he'd fall. Those were my breaths, my refusals to drown. The push and pull of escalation became a rhythm. A morning email with a new allegation, an afternoon visit to secure a counterproof. Opposing counsel submitted a witness statement from a woman claiming to be a friend who had observed erratic behavior. Elena traced the phone number to a billing address connected to Luca's lawyer's firm. Clumsy, she said, disappointed as a teacher marking a cheat sheet. One evening, returning from Elena's office, I found flyers in the building's entryway, plain white sheets with black text. Protect your elders, report negligence. No names, just suggestion, aimed like a dart at anyone who walked by. I slipped them all into my bag, my fingers shaking. Upstairs, I crushed them into the trash with more force than necessary. When I told Elena, she closed her eyes for a long second. This is the social piece, she said. They want to shake your standing so that when the judge looks at you, she also sees the haze of rumor. She reached across the table and touched my hand as if we were atop a fragile bridge. We fight it with light. So we prepared our own dossier, a timeline tidy as a curatorial label. January 11, 2025, Pear Tart, lights off at 21:40. Message sent to Luca at 21:54. Are you home safe? Aw, read receipt at 22:01. March 18, 2024, museum pass misplaced. Found by guard Bianchi at 19:12. Logged return 19:16. July 3, 2024, delayed donor car. Email to team 15:07. Stuck on the ring road. Arrival 15:39. Donor note of thanks 17:22. Each misremembered moment re-remembered with paper. Elena taught me how to answer questions without apology. Do not pad your sentences with guilt, she instructed. Guilt is a banquet to your opponents. We practiced in her office, Marina pretending to be the opposing counsel. Mrs. Moretti, do you often confuse dates? She'd ask. No, I would answer, voice level. When I am unsure, I check my log. Here. And I would slide forward a photocopy with a highlighted timestamp. The action steadied me. In the museum, we always said provenance is a conversation with time. Now time was my witness. During these days, small mercies kept me from unraveling entirely. The cat that sometimes visited the courtyard chose my windowsill and slept there, a curled comma of trust. A postcard arrived from a former intern now in Madrid. "Thank you for teaching me how to look slowly," she wrote. "At the market, the fishmonger wrapped me in extra sardine by mistake and pretended not to notice when I tried to return it." These were the breathing spaces between blows, the moments when the city reminded me I was not only a litigant, not only a mother in trouble, I was also Isabella, who knew the difference between verdigris and dirt, between an authentic crack and a staged one. Still, nights were knives. I lay in bed and negotiated with shadows. My mind replayed every kindness I'd given Luca, then twisted the memory until it accused me. "You taught him that love arrives as money. You taught him that yes is your mother tongue." I would rise at 2 in the morning, unable to bear the courtroom of my head, and sit in the living room with the light off, listening to the leather chair exhale when I leaned into it. One morning, a thick packet landed on Elena's desk, supplemental materials from Luca's legal team. Inside were photocopies of a power of attorney I had allegedly signed the previous year. The signature was mine as a blind man might draw it. Almost right, the downward stroke of the M hesitant, the final loop of the I too fast. Elena passed me a magnifier. "You tell me," she said. I looked until the lines doubled. "It wants to be mine," I whispered. "But it isn't." Elena nodded once. "We'll bring a handwriting expert. And we'll bring something better." She turned to Marina. "The museum's 1999 acquisition paperwork, pull her signatures from those. Long before any of this." Marina smiled. She liked a puzzle. I felt a strange warmth. The old me, the one who solved attributions with a lamp and a loop, had allies again. By the end of the week, a new rumor crawled through the city that I had been seen arguing with staff in the gallery, that I had lost my temper with a donor. The donor in question, a silver-haired woman named Katerina who wore silk scarves like banners, sent me a message the same day. "Darling, I only recall you rescuing me from my poor choice of shoes on the stairs. I owe you my ankles." Her voice note ended with a laugh that could disinfect a wound. Not everyone believed the fog. Yet for each kindness there was an equal sting. The board chair requested a brief leave for me to focus on personal matters. It was couched in concern, but the subtext was hygiene. They wanted distance from my scandal. I signed the leave form with a hand that didn't shake. There is a kind of stillness that follows certain losses, the stillness of an emptied stage. In that new quiet, Elena began to assemble witnesses of our own. Guard Bianchi with the logs, Fabrizio with the database exports, Signora Mancini with her Thursdays of ironing, the barista with his printed receipts, and, unexpectedly, Marina, who had once taken my public tour as a university student. "Your voice is the reason I applied to law school," she told me, blushing. "You said, the law and art both ask us to read what's beneath the surface." I remembered the day, June 5, 2018. I had stood in front of a damaged fresco and spoken about invisible scaffolding. The idea that my words had reached anyone then seemed like a message sent forward to help me now. Of Luca himself, there was no sign, only filings and echoes. Some nights I wanted to call him. Sometimes I lifted the phone and saw our last message. "You'll regret this," and set it down. Grief wears many masks: anger, logic, inventory. Mine wore work. I made lists for Elena until the lines blurred. On Monday at 11:40 a.m., Elena opened the draft of our formal response and read aloud while I followed with a pencil. It was meticulous, almost beautiful in its own way, the way a well-built case can shape air. She had the talent of turning insult into geometry. Each lie answered with a date, each insinuation with a document, each document cross-referenced with a human voice. At the end, she wrote a single line I did not expect. "The respondent asserts her right not only to manage her property, but to own her narrative." She glanced up, gauging me. "If they're going to make this public," she said, "we will not hide in shame." I nodded. My shame had burned down to coals. What remained was heat. That night, after I sealed the envelope addressed to the court, I finally lifted the frame of Mama Iluka and set it upright again. The paper looked thinner than I remembered. The red letters wobbled, Mama Iluka still insisting. I did not cry. I did not speak to it. I only looked, the way a conservator looks at a damaged piece before the work begins. Not with sentiment, but with attention. You cannot repair what you refuse to see. When I turned off the lamp, the room did not feel larger, but it did feel clearer. In the darkness, I could hear the city moving, the muffled laughter downstairs, the late trams squealing on the tracks, the river's unhurried breath. Life insisted on continuing. So would I. In the days to come, there would be courtrooms and experts and questions phrased like accusations. There would be moments when my voice would catch, when my hands would remember how a glass shatters. There would be stranger versions of me circulating in other people's mouths. But for the first time since the envelope slid under my door, I felt less like a fortress under siege and more like a person who could choose her defenders. I realized something simple then. So simple it embarrassed me with its obviousness. Darkness is terrifying only when we stand alone. And yet, a question hung in the air, stubborn as a final note. When the judge asked me to speak, will my truth be enough to pierce their fog? I wasn't looking for it. I had been sorting through a pile of folders late at night, the kind of mindless task that steadied me when my thoughts threatened to splinter. The desk lamp cast a narrow cone of light, and outside the window, Florence hummed faintly with traffic. My hands moved automatically. Open, glance, stack. Museum contracts, donor correspondence, electricity bills. And then, buried between two receipts, I found a folded sheet that didn't belong. The paper was heavier than the others, smoother. I tugged it free and unfolded it. For a moment, I thought it was one of the court documents Elena had asked me to collect. But then my eyes landed on the bottom corner, my name, scrawled in ink, except it wasn't mine. The letters were close, dangerously close. The I tall, the M curling just as I would, but the flow of the line hesitated at the wrong place, the pressure uneven, the loop of the R careless. It was like hearing my own voice play back on a broken tape. My heart slammed so loudly I almost didn't hear the tick of the clock on the wall. The paper trembled in my hands. The lamp's light gleamed off the ink as if mocking me. A forged signature. My forged signature. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. My mouth went dry and the room tilted. I pressed my palm flat against the desk to steady myself, but the wood felt icy. He did this. My son did this. The boy who once pressed crayon drawings into my hand. The man who now forged my name as if it were just another currency to spend. I whispered it aloud, voice hoarse. No, not you, Luca. But the evidence was undeniable. The document claimed to transfer power of attorney, granting him control over my accounts. I scanned the text, each line tightening around me like a rope. The date was recent, too recent. The witness signature at the bottom was a name I didn't recognize, and yet the ink was fresh, still smelling faintly of chemicals. I leaned back in the leather chair, its creak splitting the silence. My fingers traced the false letters of my name, trembling yet precise, as though touching them would confirm the betrayal was real. My thoughts ricocheted. How many times has he used this? What else has he signed in my name? What would have happened if I hadn't found it? The questions stabbed like knives, short and merciless. I wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. Instead, a strange clarity settled over me. My hand shook, but my vision sharpened. The fear that had paralyzed me for weeks cracked open, and something else rushed in, something harder. This was not just betrayal of love. This was theft of identity, of voice, of existence. To forge my signature was to erase me, and I would not be erased. I placed the forged paper back on the desk, flattening the creases with my palm. The clock ticked, each second striking louder than before, as if time itself demanded a response. I thought of Elena's words. We'll write a counterportrait. This was the missing piece, the blade I needed for my defense. Proof that his case was not built on worry or concern, but on lies. My breathing slowed. My shoulders, once slumped, straightened. I slid the paper into a plastic sleeve, the way I'd once preserved fragile manuscripts. My hands were steady now. For years, I had allowed Luca's needs to dictate my choices, his words to rewrite my nights, his demands to sign over my life piece by piece. But this forged line was the moment the canvas tore. I whispered again, but this time with steel. If you choose forgery, then I choose truth. If my son had chosen to counterfeit my name, then I had no choice left but to fight with the only thing that remained mine, the truth. My apartment became an archive in the days before the trial. The dining table disappeared under stacks of papers. Bank statements, receipts, notarized copies, catalog records from the museum. Each pile grew like a column in a ruined temple, fragile yet formidable. The lamp burned late into the night, casting yellow circles on documents I had touched so often that the ink seemed to seep into my skin. Every page was a shard of my truth. I sorted them with the precision of a curator, electricity bills aligned by month, donor emails clipped in sequence, security logs annotated with dates and times. What once had been the detritus of ordinary life had become my weapons. If Luca wielded forgery, I would counter with provenance. Elena guided me through the process with the steadiness of a general. We don't need everything, she reminded me, though she let me collect it all. We need the right pieces. A narrative made of facts. She pointed with her pen. This, yes, this, no. This will hold until cross-examination. Her assistant, Marina, flitted in and out, carrying envelopes, scanning pages, marking photocopies. Sometimes she left small notes in the margins, clear handwriting use in exhibit. Her quiet diligence reminded me of my younger self, long ago in the basement archives, tracing the lineage of paintings no one else cared to study. I wasn't alone. One by one, people arrived at my door carrying pieces of the truth as if they were offerings. Fabrizio, the archivist, placed a USB stick in my palm. Database export, he whispered. Every entry you logged in the last 10 years. Dates, times, your ID stamp. His eyes were serious, almost reverent. Data doesn't lie. Guard Bianchi came with the security logbook under his arm. He set it on the table as if delivering a relic. Your name, your signature, every entry. I signed most of them myself. They'll see. Signora Mancini from across the hall arrived with a handwritten statement. I wrote what I know. That you shop every Saturday at the same time. That you iron on Thursdays. That you never once forgot your keys. They want to call you careless? Let them argue with my memory. She patted my cheek with a flour-dusted hand. Even Katerina, the donor with silk scarves, sent a letter sealed with perfume. If anyone dares say you lost your composure in my presence, I will testify that you saved me from my own shoes. Her humor was a balm I hadn't realized I needed. Each contribution added weight to my case, but more than that, it added warmth. For weeks, I had felt surrounded only by betrayal and suspicion. Now, I felt the opposite. A quiet army forming around me, one voice at a time. At night, I rehearsed. I stood before the mirror, papers in hand, and tried to speak the answers Elena had drilled into me. At first, my voice faltered. The words caught on my tongue, and I heard the tremor in my own pitch. State your name for the record, I would murmur. My name is Isabella Moretti, I answered, barely audible. Again, louder. My name is Isabella Moretti. I recorded myself on the phone, played it back, winced at the hesitations, but repetition smoothed the edges. Slowly, the quiver in my voice turned into rhythm, the rhythm into strength. I remembered other silences, moments when I had swallowed words rather than risk hurting Luca. The times I had said nothing when money vanished, when promises dissolved, when suspicion gnawed at me. I had learned to endure in silence, to survive without confrontation. But this time was different. This time, silence would not save me. Silence would erase me. So I spoke again to the mirror, this time raising my chin. I am Isabella Moretti. I am competent. I am the one who preserved history, who raised a son alone, who knows the difference between a forgery and the truth. The reflection looking back at me no longer seemed broken. My eyes, though tired, carried a sharpness I hadn't seen in months. Preparing my testimony felt like sharpening a blade. Each draft cut away fear. Each practice strike honed the edge. I wrote key dates on index cards, shuffled them until I knew them by memory. March 18, 2024, July 3, 2024, January 11, 2025. They stopped being numbers, they became anchors. On the final night before court, I spread the documents across the table one last time. The apartment was quiet except for the steady tick of the clock. I touched each pile like a rosary, whispering to myself, "This is enough. I am enough." Elena had warned me. They will try to rattle you. They will twist questions, make you doubt your own memory. Hold to the documents. Hold to the truth. I slept little, but I did not tremble. In my dream, the drawing of Mama Iluka hung once more in the living room, its lines faint but visible, the red letters blurred. But this time, I did not turn the frame face down. I faced it. When dawn came, I dressed in black, the color of my beginnings at the museum. I pinned my hair as I had for donor galas, and for a moment I saw myself as I had once been, proud, steady, unyielding. As I locked the apartment door, I glanced back at the leather chair. It sat empty in the dim light, no longer a prison, not yet a relic. I whispered a promise to it and to myself. I had learned to speak the truth the way I once learned to read the names of ancient paintings, slowly, carefully, until the letters became clear, until the meaning revealed itself. The courtroom smelled faintly of polish and paper-old wood rubbed to a dull shine, files stacked like brickwork along the clerk's desk. Sunlight filtered through high windows and broke into pale squares on the floor, as if the day itself were divided into evidence. Behind the bench, the emblem of the court glinted, severe and impersonal. Chairs creaked, shoes scraped. A bailiff coughed into his fist and the sound went nowhere, swallowed by the ceiling's height. Luca sat across from me at the petitioner's table. A dark suit that didn't quite fit his shoulders, a tie too bright for the solemnity of the room. His eyes were empty, carefully emptied, like the face of a statue whose features time had worn smooth. He did not look at me. He looked at the table, the lawyer beside him, the papers arranged in military rows. When his gaze did drift, it slid past me as if I were glass. Elena Rossi leaned toward me, her profile a clean line of concentration. "Breathe, Isabella," she whispered. "On the facts we are stronger. On the law we are strong enough." She placed a fingertip on the edge of my folder. "When they push air, we answer with weight." The clerk read the case number, the formal titles, the dates. I heard my name, Isabella Moretti, sound out into the room. No tremor, no adornment. A small mercy. The judge, a woman perhaps 10 years younger than me with steady eyes and a mouth that did not. Opposing counsel stood first. He was young, my guess, mid-30s, but wore a confidence tailored to him like a second suit. He clasped his hands, measured his words, and pitched his voice for the echo. "Your Honor, this case is not about punishment. It is about protection," he said. "My client, Mr. Luca Moretti, comes before this court out of concern. He has observed a pattern of cognitive decline in his mother, a pattern that places her estate and, frankly, her safety at risk." He glanced my way, performed a brief look of regret. "We do not question Mrs. Moretti's lifetime of contributions. We simply ask the court to authorize appropriate oversight before irreparable harm occurs." Protection. Oversight. Appropriate. Words designed to sound gentle as fleece while hiding teeth. I felt Elena still beside me, a coiled calm. She rose when it was our turn and kept her opening short. Your Honor, this case is about protection of truth from fabrication, of a woman's autonomy from a power she never gave. The petitioner's story rests on three legs: rumor, forged paper, and rehearsed pity. We will answer with signatures that time itself verifies, with witnesses who keep records instead of grudges, and with a respondent who can account for the hours of her life as carefully as she once accounted for works of art entrusted to her care. The judge inclined her head, and the first contest began. Opposing counsel called a neighbor from 2 floors down, a woman I'd nodded to in the stairwell 3 times a year and could not have named if someone had paid me. She took the stand with a knitted brow of civic duty. I've seen confusion, she said. Mrs. Moretti once left the mailbox open for hours, and there was a day she seemed to be arguing with the ATM. Date? Elena asked on cross. I don't recall exactly, the woman said, blinking. Summer or early fall. Elena lifted a page from our folder. Entry log, building mailroom camera, June 14, she said evenly. The door jammed. The superintendent repaired it at 14:32. She let the page rest, then held up a receipt. And as for the ATM, bank statement shows a card reader error September 7, 10, 11 a.m. transaction cleared 10:15. The machine argues, people wait. A ripple of low laughter moved through the gallery like a leaf across water. The judge's gavel tapped once. The room stilled. The barista from the corner cafe followed, summoned by the petitioner. He squinted under the lights as if they were interrogators. I think she left without paying one morning, he said, unsure. Or maybe she paid the day after. I'm not saying, he faltered, eyes sliding to me. Elena did not bother to question him harshly. She placed the cafe's printed ledger, kindly loaned to us by a manager who believed in paper, on the stand's ledge. 08037 cappuccino cornetto 12. 20 paid, she read. Same morning. The witness has been busy, Your Honor. He cannot be expected to recall the ordinary with precision. That is why we keep records. Opposing counsel pressed on. He brought out a friend who professed concern, a cousin of a friend I had never knowingly met. She spoke of erratic moods, her tone hushed with the gravity of a diagnosis. Elena asked for a date. The witness waved a hand as if memory were traffic she could part. Elena asked for any message, any instance, any tangible thing. The woman glanced at petitioner's counsel, then at Luca for rescue that did not arrive. Thank you, Elena said gently, and sat. The room's air seemed to shift, like a painting when you move to view it from another angle. It was our turn to show the canvas under theirs. Elena called Fabrizio, the archivist, first. His suit was careful, his hair too short, the way shy men sometimes armor themselves. He did not look at me as he took the oath. He looked at the judge as though she were a sculpture he intended to treat with respect. You work at the museum with Mrs. Moretti? Yes. What do you do? I maintain the collections database and the access logs. Every catalog update is time-stamped, user-identified. Directing your attention to March 18, 2024, July 3, 2024, and January 11, 2025. Elena's voice warmed the dates. On each of those days, what, if anything, did the record show regarding Mrs. Moretti's work? He clicked through the export on a monitor the court had allowed. March 18, he said. Mrs. Moretti finalized the attribution notes on the Bartolini bust. Timestamp 1944. He shifted. July 3rd, she uploaded donor acknowledgments for the Baroque textiles, 1758. January 11, she created a research log at 20:37, then sent a message to a volunteer at 21:12. The system verifies user identity by unique login. It was her. Does the database forget? Elena asked. He afforded the tiniest of smiles. No. Next came Bianchi, the night guard, his uniform pressed with the respect of a man who believes his job is a promise. He carried the entry log like a choir book. She always signs, he said to Elena's first question, not waiting to be led. Always. never once sneaks past my desk. You could set your watch by her. Elena put the pen from the log in his hand. Would you read the entries for January 11? He did, slowly, reverently. My name sounded different in his voice, like something important that must be handled correctly. Moretti, 20,005. Moretti, out, 2203. He replaced the pen as one returns a blade to its sheath. For the social layer, Elena called Katerina, silk scarf bright as a bell tower in spring. She spread a letter in the air like a fan. I was told poor Isabella lost her tempers with me, she said, putting air quotes around the words as if they were dirty. Let me be categorical. I lost my balance. The stairs and I are at war. Mrs. Moretti rescued me from my ankles and also my vanity. The courtroom chuckled again. If this is cognitive decline, may I contract it at once. It produces saints. The judge hid a smile that was not quite hidden. Opposing counsel objected to editorializing, sustained, but the tone had shifted. Even the walls felt less stern. Throughout the march of testimony, I looked at Luca only rarely. When I did, it was the quick glance of someone checking a wound for bleeding. He kept his gaze fixed on some neutral middle distance. Once, when Elena introduced a page of my old notes, a pale yellow square with handwriting I could have recognized in a burning building, I saw his jaw flex. It was a tiny thing, a breath, a muscle that forgot the theater. My heart lurched, brief as a bird against a window. That is my son, the heart argued, old and foolish. The evidence kept speaking. Forged signature, witness with a billing address tied to a law office, rumors that never knew a date. There were moments I could not help seeing two LUC as at once. The one whose fingers once stumbled through Beethoven and the one who had sat silent while strangers invented my life. I swallowed hard and kept my eyes on Elena's pen when it tapped once against paper to signal that I should drink water, breathe, stay. Opposing counsel, seeing the ground shift, produced his masterwork, the power of attorney document. He laid it down with a tenderness he had not shown a human. Your Honor, we submit Exhibit Q, he said, executed by Mrs. Moretti last year. Dated, witnessed, properly notarized. It authorizes my client to act in her interests, and he has acted accordingly. Elena did not touch it at once. She adjusted her glasses, let silence build around the thing. Then she stood, as if taking the floor of a stage she knew was hers. Your Honor, she said, if I may, before we discuss the content, we must discuss the hand. She lifted our own binder and slid a plastic sleeve onto the evidence table. Inside were 3 thin papers, browned at the edges, signatures as constant as tides. These are acquisition documents signed by Mrs. Moretti in 1999, she said, voice clear as glass. New director, new era, a flood of paperwork. The ink is iron gall, the pressure consistent, the downstrokes disciplined. I invite the court and opposing counsel to compare. She turned, and for the first time since we entered the room, her voice carried something like relish. Please compare this document with Mrs. Bogg, Moretti's signature from 1999. The loop of the RAR, then, is precise, learned from years of cataloging. The loop here, she tapped the supposed power of attorney, is impatient, made by someone who has seen the signature but never worn it. Opposing counsel objected. She is not a handwriting expert, but Elena already had one waiting, a small-boned woman with sharp eyes and a CV like a litany who spoke in the anodyne poetry of forensics. Pressure mapping, stroke analysis, the tiny pause before the second arch in the M where hesitation lives. In my opinion, the expert concluded, and to a reasonable degree of professional certainty, Exhibit Q is not signed by Mrs. D. is not signed, Isabella Moretti. I felt the courtroom tilt again, this time toward me. For the medical competence, Elena did not call a psychiatrist or neurologist. The case did not require diagnoses. She called a pharmacist from the street behind the museum, a woman with gray hair tucked in a bun and the confidence of someone who had counted pills for a city for 30 years. Have you observed Mrs. Pyre Moretti over time? Elena asked. Weekly, the pharmacist said. Blood pressure medication, routine. She asks about interactions. She keeps a list. She corrects me when I forget to mark a refill. A hint of pride, she is precise. If she were confused, it would show in dangerous ways first, and it does not. Opposing counsel tried to make the point that a pharmacist is not a doctor. No, the woman said politely. I am a witness. For the practical layer, Elena brought the locksmith, a quiet man with forearms like hinges. I changed Mrs. Moretti's door cylinder last fall, he said. She hired me because she wanted to prevent unauthorized entry. She kept the second key, which is to say, she manages her household and makes prudent choices. He shrugged. Keys tell you a lot about a person. For the social layer, Elena returned to Signora Mancini, the neighbor, whose Thursdays of ironing had made me laugh when I thought I had forgotten how. She sat very straight and looked at the judge as if speaking to a cousin over coffee. I cannot speak to the museum, she said, or to medicine, but I can tell you who I see across the hall. I see a woman who picks up a dropped grocery receipt to make sure her numbers match. I see a woman who writes lists and then checks them with a pencil, not a pen, because pencils erase and pens pretend they cannot. She is not declining. She is careful. No one laughed. They nodded, even the bailiff. Careful. The word put its hand on my shoulder and steadied me. Elena touched my sleeve. It's time, she whispered. I stood. The microphone smelled like metal and the memory of rain. My right hand lifted. The oath left my lips. I told myself, speak as if you are cataloging a painting for the first time, slowly, precisely, without wanting to make it prettier than it is. State your name for the record. My name is Isabella Moretti. Where do you work? I am on leave from the Museo, where I have served as a curator for 26 years. Mrs. Moretti, Elena said, do you consider yourself in need of a guardian to manage your affairs? No, I said. My voice surprised me. It had the weight of the stacks of paper at home. I am competent. I am thorough. I make mistakes and then I correct them with records I keep. Tell the court, Elena said, what you did on January 11 of this year. I told them about the pear tart, foolish domestic detail that did not belong in a legal proceeding and yet felt more honest than any rhetorical flourish. I told them the time I turned off the lights and the message I sent to Luca. I told them the exact minutes I spent at my desk entering research notes because grief and love do not keep me from working. I told them I have lived my life in the company of dates and names and the careful habits that preserve both. Opposing counsel stood for cross-examination, warmth sharpened to a point. Mrs. Moretti, do you ever forget where you've placed things? Of course, I said. The living do. Do you ever feel overwhelmed? Of course, I said. The honest Jew. He moved in for the sting. Would you say your son lies? That he forged? That he... Elena rose. Objection. Argumentative. Sustained, said the judge. He pivoted. Do you love your son? I looked at Luca. Finally, for the first time, I looked. His face did not change. I felt something inside me refuse to split into neat categories. Yes, I said, but love does not require surrender. It requires truth. He paused, perhaps expecting tears, then retreated. Elena's redirect was minimal. She placed before me the 3 signatures from 1999. Mrs. Moretti, are these yours? They are mine. She placed Exhibit Q beside them. Is this yours? It wants to be, I said quietly. It is not. And then she stepped back. The courtroom waited. There is always a moment in trials when the human being is permitted to become more than a list of answers. I did not plan to speak. I heard myself do it anyway. I turned to the judge. I am not a perfect woman, I said. I am older than I was. I forget little things and then I find them with lists. I have been stubborn and silent when speech would have saved me time, but I am not incompetent. I am not a danger to the money I earned or the objects I adore. I raised a boy into a man with the tools I had: work, patience, and sometimes money that cost me sleep. I believed that love was a ladder and that I could climb down it to lift him up. Perhaps I climbed too far, but I did not fall. I am standing. I asked this court to allow me to continue standing. My hands were still on the railing. My breath was loud in my own ears. I swallowed, and the last sentence came clean. I can forgive weakness. I cannot forgive the betrayal of trust. For a fraction of a heartbeat, the room held still. Not the hush of waiting, but the quiet that follows a door closing on a draft. The judge looked at the papers on her bench as if rearranging them would reveal a hidden picture. She spoke slowly, first to the room, then to the record. This court's task is not to arbitrate family heartbreak, she said. It is to determine whether the respondent requires the extraordinary remedy of losing control of her own affairs, and whether the petitioner has proven the basis for that remedy. She tapped Exhibit Q with a manicured nail. The court is not satisfied with the authenticity of this document. The testimony regarding the respondent's supposed cognitive decline is inconsistent and unsupported by credible evidence. The respondent's records are detailed, contemporaneous, and corroborated by neutral witnesses. Her eyes moved to Luca's table, not unkind, not indulgent. Concern for a parent does not grant a child license to invent necessity. The petition is denied. She reached for the gavel. All documents purporting to grant the petitioner control are set aside as void. The respondent retains full control of her property and person. Any further attempts to exercise authority under disputed documents will be referred to the prosecutor for review. The gavel fell, one crisp strike that seemed to ring up into the rafters. It was the first time the sound of a gavel was not a sentence but a bell for my freedom. 9. The cleansing. Chair scraped. People rose. The air changed temperature, as rooms do when tension evaporates and leaves behind the mundane smell of wool and perfume. Elena squeezed my hand and did not pretend it was nothing. "You carried it," she said. "Not me, you." Across the aisle, Luca stood, and for an instant he looked 12 years old again, unsure of what to do with his hands. His lawyer spoke to him. He nodded, not listening. He lifted his eyes and met mine at last. There was an emptiness there that was not triumph or even rage, only a bewilderment so pure it almost undid me. I bowed my head a fraction, neither invitation nor dismissal, a gesture that meant we are no longer where we were. He turned away. Outside, the morning had grown into a softer afternoon. The courthouse steps shone like bones in the light. Elena walked beside me without talking, the way the best companions do when the sentence has been spoken and no commentary can increase or reduce its rightness. I inhaled. The air tasted of stone, warmed at last, and after rain, mineral sweetness. I realized my shoulders had dropped. The ache there belonged to yesterday. My phone buzzed. A message from Marina. A photo of my dining table, papers neatly stacked, a note on top in her careful hand. Exhibit returned. Go rest. I smiled, felt the skin at the corners of my eyes crinkle in a pattern that had not visited me in months. In my mind, I saw the drawing, Mama e Luca standing upright again in its frame, neither accusation nor absolution, just paper with a red scrawl that once bound two lives together. I did not know what I would do with it. Keep it? Store it? Let it fade in the open air until its colors surrendered to time? Choices. My choices. Elena touched my elbow as we reached the pavement. Lunch, she said, as if suggesting something radical. You will eat, and then you will sleep. I laughed, a small sound that startled me with its normalcy. Yes, I said, I will eat. I will sleep. I looked back once at the courthouse door, at the spot where the bailiff held it for people with hands too full of folders to manage brass handles. The door swung shut with the gentlest of clicks. Not a prison, a place. As we crossed the street, church bells began to ring high and bright. They braided with the quieter bells still sounding somewhere inside me, the one struck by a woman with steady eyes and a gavel that chose clarity over fog. I did not rush. I did not cling to Elena's arm. I matched her pace, step for step, as though the city and I had agreed to move at the same speed again. The gavel came down, and for the first time, it was not a verdict. It was a bell for my freedom. When I stepped back into the apartment, the silence was absolute. No shuffling of papers, no whispered strategies, no clatter of pens against wooden desks. Only the muffled hum of the refrigerator and the soft complaint of the floorboards as I crossed the hallway. The leather chair waited for me, exactly where it had always been, by the desk, beneath the lamp. For months it had held me captive, every creak a reminder of waiting, of doubt, of nights too long. Now it looked harmless, an object of ordinary life. I sank into it anyway. The leather sighed beneath my weight, but the pressure on my shoulders was gone. The gavel had fallen. The court had spoken. I had won. I whispered into the empty room, as though confessing to no one, I won, but something is gone forever. The words startled me. They hung in the air, raw and uneven, like smoke that refuses to dissipate. Yes, I had kept my freedom. I had kept my name. But the cost was written in the absence that echoed back to me. For years, Luca's voice had filled this apartment, calling from the kitchen, laughing from the hallway, asking for money, asking for more. Even when it hurt, it had been sound. Now there was only quiet and the realization that he would not walk through that door again. I thought of him across the courtroom, eyes blank, mouth set, a man made stranger by his own ambition. The son I had raised with such fierce devotion existed now only in memory. The one who stood before the judge had chosen another path, one that led away from me. The paradox twisted inside me. Relief and grief, victory and loss. My lungs felt lighter, but my chest ached. I rose and walked slowly through the apartment. The dining table still bore the neat stacks of documents Elena's assistant had returned. I touched them gently, as if they were relics. Evidence had saved me, but it had also revealed the truth I had tried so long to ignore. Love cannot be proved by paper, nor preserved by law. I moved into the living room. The framed drawing, Mama y Luca, still leaned against the wall. I lifted it, studied the faded colors, the crooked letters scrawled by a child's hand. My throat tightened. I set it back down, not face down this time, but not hanging on the wall either. It needed to rest, as I did. The night deepened outside, Florence settling into its usual rhythm. I opened the window. Cool air brushed my face, carrying the scent of bread from the bakery on the corner, the faint metallic breath of the river. For the first time in months, I inhaled without feeling crushed. And yet, when I closed the window and returned to the chair, the emptiness rushed back. The apartment felt too big, my life too quiet. The fight had filled every corner of me, every waking thought. Now there was space where battle had been, and I did not yet know how to live in it. I poured tea, the simplest act I could manage. The steam curled up ghost-like, warming my palms. I sipped slowly, listening to the clock tick, not the frantic tick of deadlines, not the suffocating tick of waiting for betrayal, but the ordinary measure of time. It felt almost gentle. As I sat, memories crept in. Nights I had stayed up sewing Luca's costumes for school plays. Mornings I had stood outside exam halls praying under my breath. Afternoons I had worked overtime tours to pay for piano lessons. All of it, stacked like the papers on my table, a record of devotion. None of it enough to hold him. The pain sharpened, then softened, then dulled into a steady ache. Grief is a slow river. You cannot dam it, only learn to float. I let my eyes close, let the leather cradle me, and told myself, this is not an ending. It is an interval. The trial is over, but life, my life, remains. There will be mornings again, and markets, and perhaps even laughter. But tonight I am empty, and that is allowed. The clock struck 11. I rose, turned off the lamp, and touched the back of the chair one last time before leaving the room. It no longer bound me. The chair that once imprisoned me was now nothing more than a hollow shell. The first morning in my new studio, I woke before the bells of Santa Croce. The room smelled of fresh paint and river air, not of old leather or stale fear. I walked barefoot across the wooden floor, cool against my skin, and opened the window. The Arno shimmered below, a ribbon of light threading through Florence. I leaned out, breathing it in air that carried no whispers of courtrooms, no echoes of slammed doors, only the promise of beginning. On the counter waited a single cup, my only surviving porcelain. I poured coffee, lifted it with both hands. The mug was light, almost weightless, so different from the phone that had once seemed heavy enough to break my wrist when I first pressed play on that damning video. The symmetry struck me. The story had begun with weight and ended with lift. I sipped. The bitterness was clean. I sold the old apartment without regret. I left behind the leather chair that had groaned under my silences, the hallway where I had listened for Luca's footsteps that never came. I carried with me only a few boxes, books, letters, a handful of dresses, and the drawing of Mama e Luca. It now hangs on the wall above my desk. The paper yellowed, the crayon lines faded. But it no longer accuses me. It does not weep or betray. It is simply an artifact, a fragment of a story that no longer binds me but reminds me of the love I once carried and of the strength I carry still. In the afternoons, I walk to a small community center where children gather with paints and scraps of paper. I kneel beside them, guiding their hands as they mix colors too boldly, lines too crooked. Their laughter fills the room, unburdened by any court, any petition. One girl asked me to show her how to draw David, and I laughed, remembering Luca at 5 years old with his crooked little statue. I showed her, and I did not flinch. Teaching them has become my quiet rebellion. Where once I curated art that belonged to history, now I help children create pieces that belong to themselves. The irony isn't lost on me. I spent a lifetime preserving the past, and in my 60s, I finally chose to invest in the present. Sometimes colleagues from the museum visit. They bring news of exhibitions, of grants, of changes in the board. They ask if I miss it. I smile and say, some days. But truthfully, I do not ache for it the way I feared I would. My curating now is of mornings and evenings, of faces and colors, of silence that is chosen, not imposed. At night, when the lamps along the Arno flicker on and the city glows gold, I sit by my window with a sketchbook. My drawings are clumsy, but I love them. Boats bobbing, swans gliding, rooftops dissolving into dusk. Each sketch feels like a reclaiming. For decades, I lifted up Luca's future as if it were a fragile masterpiece that only I could preserve. Now, I sketch myself back into being. There are still shadows. Sometimes, in the blue hours before dawn, I wake with the echo of the gavel in my ears. Or worse, with the echo of Luca's voice. You'll regret this. The emptiness rushes in, sharp as ever. But I have learned not to fight it. I let it pass through, like the tide beneath the Ponte Vecchio. Loss does not vanish. It becomes part of the landscape. I do not know what became of Luca after the trial. I have not asked, and no one has told me. Perhaps he carries on as if nothing happened. Perhaps he wonders if I still think of him. And I do. Of course I do. But the thought no longer consumes me. It sits beside me like an old scar present, undeniable but no longer bleeding. The transformation was not loud. It came in small acts. Unlocking my new door without fear of intrusion, choosing my own groceries, teaching a child to shade blue over red until purple appeared. Each gesture was an act of autonomy, each one proof that I was no longer living to preserve someone else's version of me. The symmetry is clear. At the beginning, I was a curator in a grand museum carrying centuries of art on my shoulders and the dreams of my son in my hands. At the end, I am a woman in a modest studio carrying only what I choose, and that is enough. The drawing of Mama Iluka has shifted in meaning. Once it bound me to sacrifice, to endless giving. Now it anchors me to memory without chaining me to regret. I keep it where I can see it, not as a reminder of betrayal, but as proof that love existed, that devotion was real, even if it was misused. It is not a wound, it is a relic. If there is a lesson, I will not speak it like a sermon. It is written in the simple acts, in coffee cups, in open windows, in children's laughter echoing against stone walls. It is there for anyone to read if they wish. One evening after class, a boy with ink-stained fingers asked why I always sign my name so carefully at the bottom of the attendance sheet. I smiled and told him, because a signature is not just ink. It is your truth on paper. Never let anyone write it for you. He didn't understand yet, but one day he will. I sit now by the window, the Arno silver in the moonlight. The city hums, alive, eternal. My sketchbook lies open, a half-finished drawing of rooftops waiting for me. I pick up the pencil, not because anyone demands it, not because anyone is watching, but because I want to. And that is freedom. I once lived to uphold the silhouette of another. Now, I live to sketch myself anew. Thank you for walking with me to the very end of my story. If you have stayed this far, it means you carried the weight with me, through silence, through betrayal, through the sound of the gavel that finally broke the chains I thought would last forever. I want to speak to you, not as a curator, not as a woman who won a trial, but simply as Isabella, a mother, a human being who once believed love was enough to blind her to the truth. If you have ever been betrayed by someone you trusted most, if the wound came not from strangers but from the hands of family, then you know the particular ache I carry. It is heavier than stone, sharper than glass, and it lingers long after the storm has passed. But hear me, it does not have to define the rest of your life. I chose to write my own ending. For decades, I let others hold the pen. My son, my guilt, my fear of loneliness. They wrote chapters of sacrifice and silence on my behalf. But when I stood in that courtroom, when I raised my voice, I realized something simple yet fierce. The story was still mine. I had the right to decide how it closed. And so do you. If you are holding pain in your chest tonight, if you are reading these words and feeling the sting of recognition, let me ask you this. Would you dare to face the truth, even if it came from the person you loved most? It is not an easy question. The answer may break your heart, may shatter illusions you have protected for years. But it is also the only path toward freedom. Pretending, denying, covering. It only makes the silence thicker. Facing it, naming it, refusing to surrender to it. That is where the first breath of liberation begins. I do not share this story to invite pity. I share it to invite connection. Because when I sat in that old leather chair, believing I was alone in my suffering, I did not realize how many others were sitting in their own silent prisons, waiting for someone to say, I see you, I survived too. So I am saying it now. I see you, and you can survive too. If my words have touched something inside you, I ask you to stay with me. Share this story with someone who might need it. Leave a comment if you have lived through a betrayal, or if you are still searching for courage. And if you want to hear more true stories like mine, stories of loss, of resilience, of freedom, then subscribe so we can keep walking together week by week. Your presence here matters. Every time you read, every time you respond, it turns this into more than a monologue. It becomes a dialogue, a community, a bridge built of truths too heavy to carry alone. I cannot promise that every ending is clean, or that justice always arrives with the sound of a gavel. But I can promise this. You have the right to choose yourself, to close the chapter that hurts, and to open another that heals. My story is finished, but yours may just be beginning. My story closes here, but perhaps, for you, it will open a new chapter of freedom,